Okay. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos y bienvenidos
Good
a...
morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this ACI-LAC webinar during this pandemic period, opportunity to optimize resources in airport pavement. In this occasion, we have our commercial partner, Dynatex, World Business Partner. Together with us, they organized and suggested we hold this webinar, taking into account that the pandemic constituted an opportunity in some cases in order to implement changes in the payment management system and using resources for this purpose. On this opportunity, we will know the experience of a leader, so much at the regional and world level like Dynatex, and two reference airports in the region, like the Quito and El Dorado airports in Bogota. We will have with us today three presenters of high level: Alejandra Avendaño, Director of Business Development, Dynatex Latin America and Caribbean; Paul Muson, Maintenance Manager, Keyport; and Laura Moreno, Head of Civil Infrastructure, International El Dorado Airport. We remind you that for the questions, the chat is not enabled in the Zoom. We will be doing the questions through an email you see on your screen. Please let us know who must answer your questions, and you can send them to this address here. As you've been able to see or test so much in this webinar and the other ACI webinars, we have simultaneous interpretation options. In the lower part of the menu, you can choose your language of preference, in English or Spanish, and the globe down below on your screen. And in order not to hear the parallel voices, the presenter and the interpreter, please mute original audio, so you will only hear the interpreter. Without any further ado, we have Alejandro Avendaño of Dynatex. Thank you. Thank you, Francisco. Well, good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank ACI-LAC and Francisco for being able to start with this webinar. And thanks to all of you for registering. We hope it's a useful space, and we hope you can ask different questions. Well, what are we going to look at today? Well, most of us know that COVID-19 has affected everything, specifically industry and airport infrastructure. So this is an opportunity so we can see what we can do. So much consulting firms, and we supporting different airports, and how we can take advantage of this situation and look for changes that can optimize and facilitate certain situations at this point in time. As I was saying, well, we could think, well, nobody ever imagined we would live this pandemic. Unfortunately, it's affected all of us. But specifically, we're going to talk about the airports at world level at this point in time. As we all know, this is a new beginning. Nothing is the same as before, and probably it will be a while until we return to the normality we've had before. So for us, it's clear we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this industry will evolve again. There are forecasts, and different studies have told us, and they're about when we will come back to the 2019 situation. But we don't actually know how air traffic will evolve in the next few years. And so we must start to think, what can we do with this new situation? This could be an opportunity to make changes and to rethink on aspects that had been structured differently before COVID-19. So the objective here is how we can help you reorient and maybe redefine some maintenance plans that had been structured with historical data and under previous conditions that would not be the same from now on. So what's going to happen? We have different studies, and even ACI-LAC has published some documents together with aircraft companies like Boeing. Well, they say, well, in 2020, between January and August, we've dropped almost by 58% as compared to January, August 2019. Flights have dropped in this percentage more or less, and it might happen that it can take us all the way to 2023 and 24 to go back to the conditions of 2019. So we have 3 more years to return to some similar operations similar to 2019. Besides this, there are publications that set forth that maybe the types of aircraft will be different in short term. If before we used to have Boeing 777 or 767, large airplanes, large aircraft, now the industry will migrate towards smaller aircraft. So there are publications that establish these changes that will be generated by COVID in infrastructure. So we might have smaller fuselage airplanes. So this is a change, and obviously this will affect how we manage pavement at the moment. We have different loads that we're having during this pandemic. Well, under these two premises, which are the most relevant and important ones, we could ask ourselves different things. Well, what is the damage going to be if I change the type of aircraft? Well, how can I compare small fuselage and a large fuselage? How will this affect my pavement? Two, it's evident. If I don't have the loads I used to have before, well, the models will, damages in my pavement and infrastructure will change. Evidently, if I don't have the same loads in some elements at the airports, in runways, for instance, I don't have the same daily operations, evidently, I will have to reorient and do a study. Well, how long, what is the expected life of my pavement as compared to 2019? We've also asked ourselves in Dynatics, well, I used to carry out assessments with some periodicity, but now will we continue doing it in the same manner? Well, this obviously will affect our planning. We will redistribute things and maybe reorient what we already had. So my presentation is oriented 2020 is a new beginning of what's coming in the next 2-3 years, and this will mark a new beginning. So as I was mentioning, at the moment we're doing an exercise. Well, we should update traffic. The growth rates will not be the same anymore. So we can start to think, well, if I have different scenarios, because we're not certain how quickly we will recover, if it's going to take 2 or 3 years, well, or suddenly growth will be more accelerated, I will recover more quickly. So maybe we must have an analysis of different scenarios. Well, what happens if my prior situation, the way industry had been growing, let's say, but now I will have different scenarios. What happens if I grow at a normal rate of 1.5%? How will my payment perform in my new models? What happens if I have a rate of 2 or 2.5 and so forth? And we start to manage this with Dynatics tools. And well, this allows us, one, to reorient all aircraft if airports are not gonna have such large and heavy aircraft, we can modify what we used to have, and then we're gonna have smaller aircraft now. And two, we can play around with growth rates. And with this, what are we gonna do? Generate different analyses or models. What happens if I have this growth rate or the other? What happens if I have a different composition of air traffic? So simply, just to give you preliminary information on an exercise we're working on, we have the following. Let's say I have an airplane, Airbus 320. It's different from a Boeing 777. We did a quick exercise. What happens if I have a growth rate of 5%? What's going to be my parameter of damages for the different types of aircraft? So we see these airplanes will generate different damages. And obviously, if before I had 1,000 operations between each other, 1,000, 1,000, now I will have 500 of the Boeing and 500 of the smaller ones. Well, the rates will change considerably according to the conditions I have in my structure at the different airports. Obviously, this is a theoretical exercise due to the theoretical conditions in structure, but this is the exercise we must start to look at with different elements of the airports. So this is endeavor. So the damages will be different. We need to start to analyze damages. How will they affect me, my budget, and my interventions? Well, so let us say in the figure here on your left-hand side, in blue color and green color, this is what I used to have before the pandemic. These are some calibrated models under prior conditions with the prior traffic, with prior growth rates. And now what we will do is, well, in fact, if I used to have this PCI model, well, if it's going to drop 4 or 5 points per year, here we have 2020, the new beginning. Maybe now my PCI is not going to drop 4 or 5 points, but it's going to drop 1 or 2 maybe. But for this, it's necessary to have an X-ray of the pavement, the current situation now and the next few years. And we need to look at the different parameters, surface and other parameters according to the PCI. So we need to look into this, and we are already doing this. In some airports where we are advisors, we're working on this exercise because it's about time where now we need to reinvent ourselves and take advantage of the situation as much as possible. So before, maybe I was going to intervene in 2023 or 24. Now, under my new conditions and new models that I have to start to calibrate, maybe it's not going to be this year. Maybe I will need some other types of interventions, maybe because my year will not be functional or structural or vice versa. So this is the call. We must take advantage of this opportunity. Nobody expected this pandemic, but we need to see how we can optimize these types of situations. And this will be evidently an issue of resources. If I can redistribute all my interventions, I will have a very different planning in my maintenance, and I will generate different types of savings for 2020. So maybe I had calibrated other models in prior years, but now it's going to be totally different. Simply here, just to show you a specific model of the surface condition of my pavement. Before, maybe I could have the blue curve, maybe 100 points per year, but under my current conditions, with everything that happened in 2020, maybe my PCI will not drop in the year 10. Maybe I will not have PCIs in year 10 of 90, or excuse me, of 80. maybe PCIs of 92, my curve will not drop so steeply, but softer, let's say, because of this new situation. So this is in regard to calibrations, damages from the different types of aircraft we will have now, and growth rates. Now, in regard to what I was saying, what's going to happen with what I had been doing with X frequency with my diagnoses? So we generated surface conditions every year, maybe every 2 years, and we evaluated sometimes frictions due to the rubber on the wheels. We did it with more regularity. But now what's going to happen if in my runway I don't have my same operations and I have to check more constantly operational safety and asphalt or rubber on my surfaces. So there will be an opportunity to redistribute this frequency of the works. And certainly this can generate some economic benefits, definitely. So in order to close, well, we can't just take information out of anywhere, up from the air, and we need to have models with proper basis. So we need to evaluate what is the status of my surface conditions, structural, functional conditions. Now with these current conditions, I can work on the different scenarios or models to see how my pavement is going to behave. So we need to look at the surface structural conditions. So what is the idea? After I have this X-ray of my pavement, well, after I have my diagnoses with my measurements and my assessment, well, we need to inspect in those airports that don't have it, loaded areas, unloaded areas. Now we will calibrate these models, taking into account 2020 is a new beginning, to see how my payment will behave from now on. And maybe we can recover by 2023, and we can go back to 2019 levels, and we can look at the interventions that can apply today. Maybe in the past I had many of interventions that don't apply now. And this is what we want to assess or evaluate, calibrate our models. And with this, we want to have a budget and a plan for new activities under new conditions for this pandemic. I think this is all on my behalf. Thanks to everyone, and thanks for accompanying us during this webinar. Thank you very much, Alejandra, for your presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning, if some people joined a bit late, I remind you that the questions will be done at the end. We encourage you, please, to send your questions, and sending the name of the person who must answer your question. And the final 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A, questions and answers. Without any further ado, we go to Mr. Paul Musen, Airport Manager of Quito, Maintenance Manager of Quito Keyport. Thank you for accompanying us today. This part of the presentation is more about the day-to-day experience that we have in Keyport Airport. We want to give you our version why PMS is a valid and necessary option to keep our pavement in the best conditions as possible and to adjust to the pandemic situation as well as possible, as Alejandra mentioned. Alejandra's presentation presented most technical aspects, but from the day-to-day points of view, I want to give you some additional points so you start to think or rethink useful things. As Alejandra was saying, we are going through difficult times There is no precedence in aviation for this during the last 100 years. Maybe September 11 is the only reference we have on such a difficult moment when operations drop so much. But nonetheless, no experience in the aeronautical sector has lasted 6, 7 months, and even a few more years. So one of the highest costs in our airports is our pavement in our surface areas. There's about 1 million square meters of pavement we must maintain normally in some airports, and depending on aeronautical conditions, they will be more or less affected. So due to the current low operations and low income that is affecting maintenance at the airports, we need to see how we adjust so that these expenses are as close as possible so we can guarantee a balance or an equilibrium point to guarantee proper operations. Every airport, as I was saying, has great needs. We need to keep our pavement in the best possible conditions to guarantee safe operations, but as a business, this is where I want to be very specific. We need to be profitable at long term, even though we can have 1, 2, 3 day maintenance. To do it during the whole year is not real. The maintenance costs for pavements in an airport are close to 50% of the cost of the maintenance operation, the whole maintenance operation. I cannot give you specific information. It depends on every airport, but for us to have adopted a PMS, a pavement management system, has allowed us to look into the evolution of our pavements and allowed us to see how we can spend or will spend our resources. In the middle of this pandemic, we have a great paradox here. We have many more a lot more work that we need to do, but it's more difficult to go in and do the work. For you to understand me, if we start with 100 maintenance works or jobs, due to our resources, this has been reduced by 40%. So we need to see where we place our resources to be as efficient as possible. In every industry, especially our industry, we have many alternatives. Technically, either we spend too much every day to be able to have the best possible conditions, or we try to spend nothing and to see how long we can hold on. Well, of course, every alternative has pros and cons, and it depends on the policies of every company. But we cannot stop thinking we are an airport, and as an airport, we must guarantee operational safety of every movement. Of course, the best option as an airport is prevent risk at any cost possible. So we need to be cautious on what is the condition of our pavement. Well, I imagine most of us here understand the chart here down below, the deterioration of the PCI. It's the black line we see here down below. Typically, in an airport, we establish above 80, 100 PCI is not ideal, but it's the costlier. In normal conditions, we can leave it deteriorate up to 70, a level of 70, and at that point in time, do maintenance. This is the ideal point between 70 and 75. But in view, many airports don't have necessary resources for maintenance. They can go to a lower point. The critical point is considered PCI 55. Nonetheless, due to the current studies based on historical maintenance, we know If we do maintenance when PCI is above 70 at an acceptable level, we will have a cost 4 or 5 times less than if we have a PCI of 50. This is very important, and this is where the PMS is very important. Pavement management system is very important to predict when when we will have a deterioration of this level is vital, so we don't have these high costs. So we need to predict when we will reach 70, and we will apply our resources for maintenance. And as I was saying, PMS is very valuable here. I have an example for you here, how we stratify the different areas and how we measure PCI in every area. For instance, we have regular, excellent, acceptable conditions. If I can predict I will reach an area that will reach an acceptable parameter, that means I must be ready for maintenance. Maybe maintenance could not be done, and we reached a position where the amount of asphalt is at regular levels. That's a critical situation where we might have operational risk, and this is not allowable. This cannot be allowed. In the manner PMS is being executed, we will know the future behavior of our spaces, and we can predict and prevent to reach these conditions. It's not a savings from the economic point of view at this point in time, at short term. It's a savings on the resources we will have to invest on at a point in time. Why do I say resources and money or funds? Because in Latin America, costs vary too much from year to year. So we need to be very careful when we implement PMS and introduce data. We need to take into account this volatility. This is important in our deterioration models. We need to take account the economies of our countries. I'm about to close, so I will give you a summary of some things we consider advantages with PMS in Keyport. First of all, this allows us to know the status, the state of the pavement condition. It's an X-ray of my current status of my pavement. It tells me where my problems are and where do I need to attack them. This X-ray will give me an X-ray with PMS and will tell me how every area of the pavement is doing or how long it will last. Alejandra was telling us we don't need to measure all parameters every year. Well, with the first 5 years of doing this, we know where we need to go. Well, there are years we do all the evaluations, some years we do structural evaluations and so forth, and we can save some money. But the most important point is we need to adjust the PMS model for every airport. There's no general model for every airport. A code ECO 4 doesn't exist. Every airport has differences, and we need to adjust every PMS to every airport. Second, when we can predict the deterioration trends, many times they tell us where, how it will deteriorate, how you must act. No, here it's more important that if we know one area will last longer than the other, well, we need to place more attention on that area. So with our measuring systems, we know we need to act quicker on those areas with faster deterioration. In this model, to predict the right time in order to intervene is very useful, because this is when we meet with civil authorities and aeronautical authorities to coordinate activities. When we have large maintenance, large-scale maintenance, where we need to close an apron or something, it's important to have these models that will allow us, with 6 months or 1 year anticipation, we can know when we need to coordinate this type of work. Normally, for everyone at the airports to coordinate a closing of an area, a large area in an airport, can take us between 3 to 4 months, just the logistic aspects in order to request closing an area of an airport. For work that will not take any longer than 12 months, maybe. So it's important to coordinate in time logistic aspects in how we will do the work. Well, the part every one of you is expecting and what you want me to tell you is where savings are. Savings are that we can estimate costs and maintenance times or major repairs. But believe me, savings go beyond this. It's not about predicting the cost of a job or a specific work, but predicting the active life of our pavement. Well, depending on deterioration, costs will be higher, but it's not the specific cost of a repair that we need to look at, but to keep the useful life of our airdrome as long as possible. This is the big advantage and what we need to look at. And last, in Keyport, PMS allows us to guarantee operational safety when pavement is kept in the best possible conditions towards the future. For the time being, I have nothing else to tell you. Any question, please, at the end of the presentation, I can answer. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. Before going to the last presentation from Laura, I want to remind you that, as Paul said, all questions will be answered at the end of the meeting, and I want to remind you that we will be receiving them on this email address here. Please tell us who you're addressing your question to. Okay, we've received some questions and we will answer them at the end. Thank you very much. And next, we go on with Laura Moreno, Head of Civil Infrastructure, El Dorado Airport. Thank you, Francisco. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for attending. Thank you to ACI-LAC for the invitation. We saw in Alejandra's presentation, we looked at technical aspects. What is the equipment that is used? What are the measurements? We saw a bit of the advantages that we have with the PMS with Paul. In my case, I want to show you what have been the results of the measurements in El Dorado Airport. What are the advantages and what is coming towards the future? That is what I want to show you a bit. Well, I will tell you about 4 topics. First of all, I want to introduce El Dorado Airport and Opain. We will talk about evaluation diagnostics, maintenance plan frequency, and what is the importance of having proper sections or sectioning for maintenance. I will show you some of the results we've obtained in the maintenance plan together with some charts and costs. And finally, we will talk about what is the advantage with our maintenance in our operations. Well, El Dorado Airport is an airport that was built more than 60 years ago. In the next photographs, here we see an X-ray of the airport. This is an X-ray of our airport. You can see the air photograph of 2007. In 2007, El Dorado was concessioned to Opain, and at the beginning we had 3 small terminals. We started modernizing, expanding the airport. So in 2012, we expanded the cargo terminal, and we had up to 25 positions. We built a part of the terminal in 2013. We finished building the terminal, but the old terminal was still in operation. As we can observe, there's something important to mention here. During this whole stage of modernization, expansion of the airport, the operations at the airport never stopped, and we kept growing year after year, even though we were building a new airport at an old airport. In 2015, we see most positions started their operation. We only had a small part that we needed to demolish. And in 2020, you can see what we currently have in El Dorado, totally renewed airport with new positions and conditions. Here you see some relevant information of the airport. In the airport, we have 2 runways, 3,800 meters each. Maintenance is done by civil aeronautics. We have 1 million square meters and platforms, and Opain carries out maintenance. And I will present the maintenance plan for you. We count with 552 employees. We have 300,000 operations. That was in December 2019. Well, I want to show you what is the future we expect in El Dorado Airport. We count with 25,000 employees at the airport, the airlines, and all different collaborators in a normal airport. We count with 122 positions, out of which 39 are contact positions, with jet bridges, 33 in the cargo terminal, 10 in Terminal 2. This is a terminal for domestic flight, and 40 remote positions. Now, I will explain what is the evaluation and diagnosis we carry out. Well, we started with this maintenance plan since the year 2018, but since 2013, we've been measuring PCI with photometry. We used to do it every year, but we did not have proper software so we could predict. So with these measurements, we made decisions for interventions. Many of these interventions had to be done immediately back then. So we started to reorient things. I think most airports are working on proper procedures, but we need to look for new alternatives, new methodologies, new materials. Many times, these procedures are based in experience of the airport operator, which is very good, and this is very important for the maintenance plan we are elaborating at this point in time with our consultant. This has helped us to work on standard procedures for construction that are shared with our work contractor, and we can in 2018, we made the decision to start to continue with the year-to-year measurements, but we started working on a software so we could predict properly the needs for intervention and not to wait until the deterioration curve reached the bottom. So this was costing us more, and it was higher cost for our budget. So we revised new methodologies, we validated new materials and new technologies. As Paul mentioned, the importance of a maintenance plan, well, it helps us in certain ways. And one of the most important things we have is to predict and to have a budget towards the future. This is one of the things we currently need. And I think most of us that are in this maintenance area, well, our managers have started to ask, what's coming? What are the interventions? How much money do we need to invest in the next 5 years, 4 years? Here, we have something important. Not all airports operate the same. At this moment, we had calibration curves for El Dorado. This is something very important. All curves are different for all airports. We don't use neither the same materials or the procedures in some countries are different. References change. So it's important that the calibration curve is done for every airport. In our case, we use a software, which is Airbus, where we input different data. We input the geo-referenced information, where we input all our standard issues and or information. We see if they have the same traffic, whether they were built in the same year. Additionally, in the airport, we decided to create what are loaded areas or zones and which were not. Initially, we decided to analyze our airports due to their position. But those that work at the different airports know that pavements that are truly affected are where the main weight of the aircraft goes through. So we analyze loaded areas and unloaded areas, and in some of these areas, we left some of the ground equipment or not. This is very important. It's not the same to analyze 100 square meters or 200 square meters and project this on a budget. We need to have a real budget for every airport. In this software, we inputted operations, as Alejandra mentioned. It's very important to input operations. Operations have changed drastically. We had 5 months where our airport was closed down. We only had humanitarian flights for a while, and this is there were very low operations, not even 1% of the what we used to have. Currently, we are updating our maintenance plan and our curves so much of PCI and photometry, because it's not the same having 300,000 annual operations to what we currently have and to what is coming in the future. So one of the most important things in our software and from the data we must input and analyze at the moment is our operation. We input the PCI value, remaining life, and unit costs. On the right, Alejandra and Paul presented the same chart. And well, this type of chart is what we need to present this to the board for our budget. There are different strategies for maintenance. We know pavement is affected because of two aspects. One, because of the climate. If we control fissures or others, well, the life of the pavement will be longer. The second factor is traffic. What happened now? Many of our airports closed down. We had to stop all our operations. What does this mean? Well, the PCI was stable, and what we will measure next year will be similar to what we had in the first year. As Alejandra mentioned, we already had some data from calibration data where we said our PCI in our airport is diminishing between 5 and 6 points in our airport. But what's coming now, it will not diminish between 5 and 6 points. Maybe it'll diminish between 1 and 2 points. We need to recalibrate our model. There's something very important. We don't need to only input data in our software. We need to be critical, all the way from the operator. We operators are the ones that truly know what our damages are, what affects operations, what happens if a part of the surface or concrete or surface is damaged. We know what are the most critical areas of the airport. The software can tell us marvelous things, but we are the ones that must know as operators what's going on. But this maintenance plan is not only by the consultant, it's done by the consultant and the operator together. Well, as I was saying, one of the most important parts is the sectioning. In our case, we divided the zones between loaded, unloaded zones or areas. Loaded areas is where the main fuselage of the aircraft goes through. Unloaded is where we leave ground operation systems. Flectometry, deflectometry operations, we always do them in the same surfaces or pavements. We also do load transfer analyses, and here there's something important. It's important to be critical with the results, because within our operations, one of our big headaches used to be the corners, and we started to do the analyses, and the analyses told us that in the taxiways, the main fuselage of the aircraft is going right through where the different parts of the pavement join together. And we saw most of our problems were at the corners. So we were not only analyzing the center of the pavement surfaces, and we decided to analyze the corners too. Well, what are the results of the maintenance plan? What we did not want just to have one alternative. We generated 5 alternatives, and with 2 important factors. The first factor, as I told you, is to analyze loaded and unloaded area and analyze the whole diamond position and to see how much our model changes. The second factor was to use the conventional interventions, the types of materials we use day to day, the norms we use, everything we do from day to day, what we have been doing in the last 12 years of concession. The second was to use new materials, what happened, how we can optimize with new materials. But these new materials must be calibrated. We need to be 100% sure they will work properly at the airport. As I said, not all materials work properly for all airports. We all have different types of pavements, materials, climate, and so forth. And this is the financial effect. What happens? We did the curve all the way to 2038, 20 years of maintenance plan. But as I told you, our concession is for 20 years. We in 2027 must deliver our concession, must turn it over, and our pavement's life is for 10 years. So we need to deliver this back to the state with proper maintenance. So we see in different years, we have different scenarios. Some go way up in investment and some drop. This depends on the type of investment, traffic, many factors. So the operator works on this analysis. As Alejandra and Paul mentioned, measurements are not done every year. In our case, we decided to do deflectometry interventions every 2 or 3 years, and PCI interventions we do every 2 years. With this, we want to calibrate our model. So what we see in this chart, I wanted to show you the results we obtained in 2018 in the financial effects for scenario 5. We see the investments I need to have year by year, and what were the results in 2019 in the same areas with the same stakeholders, with the calibration curve more adjusted in the airport. So we started to see there were differences in the investments year to year. Why these differences? Because in some years, we have more interventions, larger interventions. In 2019, we intervened in different pavement areas. So in 2020, there was a reduction in intervention. But now in 2021, we have other areas that are requesting a larger intervention. So we started to look at the variations in our budget. And what's coming now? This is one of the questions that all our directors have been asking. What will be the investments we need to carry out in the next few years? And this is a question that none of us can answer properly. We don't know the answer. We don't know if the operation will recover in 1 or 2 years, not even in 3 years. Our calibration curve of the PCI and how many points we projected would drop, how many points we thought, well, it would not be constant anymore. This is an analysis we need to work on year by year and start to project the different scenarios. Currently, at the airport, we are analyzing these 3 scenarios. What happens if we recover the operation we had in 2019 in 1 year? What happens if it's in 2 years or 3 years? So with this, we can come up with a closer value of intervention for the next few years. This is one of the big advantages we currently have in having these measurements and delivering or providing a result closer to our reality. I think this is all on my behalf. Thanks to everyone for your time. Any question, concern, it'll be my pleasure to answer at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much, Laura, Paul, Alejandro, for your presentations. As we mentioned at the beginning, now we have a brief session of Q&A, questions and answers. I will read the first question, Claudio Fonseca. I think it's addressed to Paul, but any of the 3 presenters can answer it. We would like to know your opinion, and it's the following. I would like to know if you could tell us how you would address questions or comments like this one. If you have less cargo with less flow, will it have savings in the interventions in the pavements? Well, in general, the answer is yes, but not immediately. The savings are in time. Why? Because reduction in load or cargo or in loads will not be reflected in the PCI immediately, but more or less in 1 year. You will know the effects you had on the previous year. So in fact, your PCI status today will not change. You need to look at the time variations. The variation will be seen in the future. Recovery will not be immediate. The way we had 5 months of no operations, the PCI remained good. So the PCI was maintained properly during these 5 months, but savings we will see at long term because the recovery will not be immediate. I would like to add one thing, Claudia. In our airport in Quito, the only thing that did not drop was cargo transportation. This is what affects PCI the most. Thank you, Paul. I don't know. Alejandra, no, what they mentioned is enough, but this is why we must continue following up. Well, what is the current status so we can predict these types of variations? Thank you. We have another question from Cesar Tello, and this is for Laura of OPAIN. In operational safety aspects, the airport with a system, OPAIN monitors. How do you integrate the components of pavement in the PCI system if another institution is doing it? Well, as I mentioned before, the taxiways and runways are not in charge. We don't maintain them. This is done by civil aeronautics, civil aviation authorities, and there's integration between operations and maintenance. Well, measurements we normally do in January and February, so we get results on April. And this is giving us a window approximately of 9 months to project our interventions. So this is giving us time to socialize, not only with operational people of the airports, but also with the airlines, so that the operation is not too affected when we hold these types of interventions that we know are very invasive. Operational safety is not only done by operational safety, it's done by all of us, starting with maintenance, operational safety, platform inspectors, civil aviation authorities. We all do it together. Thank you, Laura. This question is for Paul about how overnight affects the taxiways or runways at the airports. What is the experience for Keyport? Thank God in Keyport we have not had that inconvenience. Very few aircraft remain overnight, and the follow-up we did, we only had problems in a frontal position. In fact, this situation is more reflected in flexible pavement areas where it's ideal not to park aircraft for long periods of time. I know from other airports where they had this situation in taxiways where lots of aircraft were parked, and they would need to re-asphalt all the surfaces. But thank God in Keyport we did not have this issue or problem. Thank you, Paul. Laura, do you want to share something else? In Bogota, no, we did not have overnight problems. Most of our positions, no, 100% of our positions are in concrete, so the effect was minimum. The damage was minimum. Almost no aircraft was parked overnight. Almost none. Thank you, Laura. A couple more questions before we finish. Richard Mora is asking about the cycle of decontamination and the methods you used. What do you suggest to use, high or low pressure, in your experience? I think this is more for me than Laura. Basically, it all depends on the type of spill or situation you want to clean. Normally, it's best to use low pressure, not high pressure, because you will have erosion, especially on flexible pavement. You will have large damages. It's not recommendable unless you need to remove paint or special situation. We currently, in order to remove rubber, we can use up to 40,000 pounds. Normally, we use only 20,000 pounds. And in rigid pavements, we normally don't allow more than 20,000 pounds. We've found that 20,000 pounds is more than enough. So my recommendation is to keep the low pressure range. Thank you, Paul. We have one more question from Rafael Duran of GAP. In how many years do you think it's prudent to carry out students in order to recalibrate PCI again and in order to predict the future in view of the new operations that are coming in the future? In my case, I recommend annually, even more so with what's ongoing at the moment. The effects on the PCI are mostly because of the aircraft traffic, and the pandemic totally changed the operation. So from having minimum operations, and it will be a slow recovery. So the calibration of the model will not be in 1 or 2 years or 3 years. This calibration of the model must be done long term. I just wanted to complement here something that we don't know either is the time frame and proportion how we will recover in the industry. In El Dorado, in Opain, we're working on an exercise in migrating different scenarios. What Laura was saying, what happens if we recover in this magnitude, or we have a rate of 2%, or if we recover in 5%. So this will go hand in hand with what we observe, and it goes hand in hand with a proper diagnosis and time. Well, We need to take into account, it all depends on every airport. An airport that has been operating for a long time with long time maintenance, you know the behavior of your pavement, your surfaces. You can risk not measuring every year, but you must take into account what civil aeronautics demands on every country or state. In my case, I must do PCI every year, every 2 years, excuse me.
Francisco, estás en mute. No sé
Francisco, you're muted. Excuse me. We have time for one last question from Rafael Núñez of OINSA. He's asking us, departing from the low current operations, how much is the impact due to meteorization?
Bueno, no tengo una respuesta para esa pregunta.
I don't have an answer for that question, truly. The impact is very uncertain. I cannot, it's difficult to predict climate aspects, I suppose. Well, if any of the presenters want to have a closing comments, any more questions we receive, we will send to the presenters so they can answer you back. Francisco, thank you very much. Thanks to Laura and Paul for your support in this webinar. We need to continue working hand in hand, all of us together, so we can come up with our best work ahead in the future. Thank you for your assistance, and any question, concern, you have our emails. It will be a pleasure to answer you back. Thanks for the invitation. Any questions? Welcome. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thanks. May you have a good day. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.